Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, I'm recording this on December 31st, 2020. I'm currently not that far from 2021. It's a bit surreal. It's interesting how much of like not a big deal the passage of years is, but also every once in a while, and especially on sort of landmark days like this, I find it hard not to kind of, think about how quickly time passes. And especially, I mean, I've talked about this obviously many times, but I need to retire that from my vocabulary because obviously I'm going to repeat myself. But it's amazing when you're a kid, you'll go through this process of thinking about something coming up in like a week, and it seems like forever away. And just that anticipation and the passage of time versus now, and I'm not trying to be, sarcastic here, but like I literally blinked and it was a year ago. I blinked and it was 2 years ago. I mean, it's like, poof. And I'm not even that old. I mean, I imagine if you lived to be 100 or through life extension technologies, 1,000, I've got to think at a certain point, it's like the calendar pages just flying off the wall, like some movie, some TV show. So my topic for today, and I thought about a couple of different things. I was going to talk about insurance. I've talked about healthcare many, many times. Um, Always just fucking irritated with my company, my company being United Healthcare, who is still, I have to say, worlds better than what I had when I was on an ACA plan. It was more expensive than my current group plan with work, covered less, had a higher deductible, all of this stuff. But still, I went in, talked about this a while back, but went in for a colonoscopy, was told by my primary care physician, it'll be covered, it's, because you have family history, it's totally kosher. Then I kind of find out, oh no, you've got, and not just, the thing that's annoying about it also is that it's not just that you're paying one bill, you start getting like several bills from the same procedure. One is for the anesthesiologist, one is for the doctor, one is for the surgical center. And you start thinking like, what the fuck? Come on, people. So it was just annoying. I went through an appeals process with my insurance company, obviously didn't work out. And then, finally get the bill, have it, I'm going to pay it. But I paid the one for the anesthesiologist, no problem. And the biggest one, which was, to be fair, only like $900, but still only like $900 for something that should have been covered. It's a little fucking annoying. But I got that, and I paid it eventually, and then, or at least I thought I did, and then I go, like a month later, I get a bill. I didn't notice it until like, half a month after I got it, because I get so much crap mail. I basically just have this pile of mail from like months and months ago, and then I go through it eventually because it gets absurdly long. I went through that, I found this thing, and I look at it and I'm like, this is a lot more than what the other one was. I thought that I paid it too, so that's weird. But basically turned out they sent me to a collections agency and put a 40% premium on. So as much as it was already, it was even more on top of that. Almost, okay, 40% is not 50%, but it's close enough to half that I'm gonna say it's almost half of the procedure just for this. And again, like as far as I knew, I paid it. Something must have not happened and it didn't go through, but who the fuck knows? It's just like this ongoing saga that does not need to be a pain in the ass. And it's something, it just kills me because in America, you get so many people who are, like they act as though this is just the only way it could be and you can't possibly, how could we improve things? The rest of the, I hesitate to use the term developed world, but for want of a better term, the rest of our peer countries, the countries that are like us in terms of socioeconomic status, GDP per capita, all of these things. The rest of them do not have this issue. Now there are some that have universal health care through a single payer. There are some that have like a national health service. There are even some that have some semi-private system. But they don't have people that don't have coverage. They don't have people getting these insane bills. There's someone who I watch on YouTube periodically. I think German Girl in America. And she broke her wrist over the summer. And she has very good German health care, or German insurance for expats. So she's actually okay. Covered in the sense of okay. She goes to the hospital, has the thing, gets the estimate, sends it in, and they're like, what the fuck? Could we fly you to Germany and do the procedure and then fly you back? And they were gonna, like, in the sense that they would fly her to Germany in a pandemic, have her do the procedure there and fly her back. And it would have been much cheaper because it was $40,000 just for that. And that's not the whole thing. That's not including all of the drugs and all of this stuff. Just for the fucking procedure, $40K. In Germany, and yeah, I'm not saying it's free, and you obviously have to pay people who are highly skilled to do this work. But first off, you can get medical education much cheaper, if not free. So you don't have you don't have like a house worth of debt going out into the world. You can have things where you have this stuff covered and people have, for want of a better word, principles. Like here, things are all about making the maximum amount of money possible. It's a sickness. It's like a hoarding kind of thing. Like it's not good enough to make a good product or to provide a good service and make a fair amount on it. You have to squeeze every last drop from the person you're getting money from. And it's just fucking disgusting. It's just, and it's not just there. I mean, it's literally fucking everywhere. If you want to talk about Bezos and Amazon, he does this process where, just basically squeeze out every drop of margin that he could get from any of the people who sell there. And it's kind of a thing where if you don't sell there, you're fucked. I mean, there's a term, this is going to segue into the thing that I'm actually going to talk about, like fucking probably 10 minutes into this video. But there's a saying that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. And this is, I think part of this, it's kind of a problematic saying in some sense, but I do think it's kind of true. Like, I used to talk a lot about vote with your wallet. Don't go to Home Depot, go to Lowe's. And I still do that. I would never go to Home Depot knowing how bad the founder is. I would never go to Papa John's again. I used to eat there a lot before, when I was in grad school in Hawaii. It was like a weekly thing. I would get a pizza and then I'd go for a hike. And then years later, I realized, oh God, the guy who founded this thing, and he's a horrible guy. To be fair, I'm not giving him that much money. And also my choice not to go there, this is the problem, my choice not to go there isn't really hurting him. This is also, it gets to like, I'm trying to like wean myself from using Amazon. But the problem is, it doesn't really matter. Because as things are set up, I can spend none of my money at Chick-fil-A. I can spend none of my money at Amazon or Home Depot, any of these horrible places. And it doesn't, like, they're still billionaires. They're still, I've not gone to, I don't know when the last time I went to Walmart was. The one that I remember was like a decade ago with someone else because she was buying something and she liked Walmart. So personally, I'm sure that I've bought something there, but it's been a very, very long time. And I intentionally avoid it because, I mean, aside from the fact that, there are studies that show Walmart is actually not particularly cheaper. Like if you buy a set of groceries, for example, you do it at Target, you do it at Walmart, you go someplace else. People have this perception through marketing that Walmart is much cheaper. But in reality, the Target one, in fact, the studies that I saw, the Target was slightly cheaper. But it was definitely not like, a slam dunk one way or another, like markedly cheaper. And when you go to Walmart, there's a weird smell. You look up at the ceiling and it's just plastered in cameras. You have this, it's super bright too. I feel like I'm being interrogated or like I'm a prisoner or something. I mean, maybe they've changed this, but I don't think so. There's something also about the culture of the people that go there, and I don't mean to disparage people. Maybe they're largely different socioeconomic status. Whatever it is, driving in and out of the parking lot there, I find it's much more chaotic, much more sort of dog eat dog than going someplace normal. And it's kind of like, I mean, yeah, I talk a lot about this. I really thought for a while, and I still kind of like, there's a inkling of wanting to do this in the back of my mind, but I thought for a while about making a Not Mr. Rogers sort of YouTube channel, which would be sort of a modern version, mainly talking about like little things that people should just know. They should honestly just be taught in middle school. And a lot of these are just so-called common courtesies, basic things that, and you know, like earlier on in the video, I don't know if you saw me rub my nose. I did that because it itched and I'm gonna wash my hands later. I'm not in contact with people, but stuff like that, being aware that you're doing that, it's something that most people aren't. Being aware, and this is one thing, like the first thing about Obama that really, like, I always loved the guy, and you know, like, he's amazing at speeches, and you know, I guess he wasn't always, but in the time that I saw him, fucking blows it away. And you know, like, first black president, you feel pretty good about that. First thing that I saw with him that kind of like started to sour me a little bit, and this was something where I'm like, it's not, like, you can't criticize him that much for it, but still irked me, was there's a picture of him at Chipotle, and he's got his hand over the sneeze guard, and I understand most people have not studied microbiology. They don't know fuck all about aseptic technique. Even now in a pandemic, I see crazy shit. I went to the coffee shop yesterday, and someone with naturally a Blue Lives Matter thin blue line bullshit license plate, someone in front of me, I'm watching, and at Dutch Brothers, they have a pretty decent procedure to avoid contact. And in particular, if the people in the car who were getting their stuff were wearing a mask, there'd basically be very little probability of getting any kind of exposure to the people in Dutch Brothers. Of course, most people don't wear a mask. It fucking irks me. And which, you know, my mask is for you, your mask is for me. Your mask is keeping all of the shit that's flying out of your face while you're talking from going into the face of the person at Dutch Brothers. And it's gonna go through their mask because the particles are small enough generally, or there are some in there. Whereas at your mask level, it can contain most of that stuff and then just a very tiny fraction get out. And those tiny fraction, you know, I mean, it's all probabilities, but you multiply a small number times a small number and you get a very small number. Yeah, you can figure this out. People don't do that. And they don't realize, this is one of those things, like in this Not Mr. Rogers thing. If I was talking and you had a shot from the side and it was backlit properly so that you could see the droplets, which are normally invisible, I'm a pretty self-aware person. I'm knowing like what's going on to some, I mean, more, I'm not saying like more than everybody, but more than the average person, I'm aware of it. And I try to not be an asshole about this stuff. And yet I am aware that as I'm talking, and if you pay attention, you might notice this too, as you're talking, you're literally spraying saliva, even when you're breathing too. When you're doing the Obama hand over the sneeze guard thing, and constantly also, you're raining down skin and shit that's on your skin, which is a fuck ton of bacteria and other various assorted horrors coming off of your skin. You're putting your hand over that sneeze guard, you're literally just sprinkling your own like fecal matter, literally, no exaggeration there, into the food for the next person. So thanks and fuck you. And I understand again, I don't think people do this maliciously for the most part. There are people that do, but for the most part, like, I don't think Obama's sitting there doing this like knowing, I'm gonna sprinkle my shit over the food. I don't think so. But it doesn't matter if you think that or not. You should just fucking know it when you're driving. You should just know if you're coming to a red light, and to be fair, I'm not perfect at this, but I try. If you're coming to a red light and you're in the right lane and there are people behind you, why not move over one lane? And there's no turn lane. This is important. Why not move over one lane so that the people behind you, if they want to turn, can turn without having to wait a light cycle? It's just the stuff that this would cover if I did it would be very simple, and it would be by and large, like, ideally probably stuff that in retrospect seems like no shit, but people don't know it, and it still, would be helpful in the moment. So anyway, I think about that from time to time. I don't know if I'll ever do it, but it's like in the back of my mind. And so, I keep going. I'm actually going back and forth on whether or not I want to. I normally don't have notes. I have a list of like 1,000 notes. I'm exaggerating slightly here. It's like into the hundreds though, of things I want to talk about on a subject that I'm debating if I even want to put out there. And it also, like the first quarter of this is probably going to be something completely irrelevant to that. So, yeah. But that being said, I think I am going to talk about it. It's the end of the year. Why not? So I've talked about healthcare a lot. I've talked about, this basic like aseptic technique, all of this. And getting back to that thing I mentioned, which is there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. One thing that I think that leads to is that fundamentally this is a problem with, say, climate change. People frame a lot of these things as matters of personal choice. And it sounds great. It's like, oh, you vote with your wallet, get a Prius, drive less, and use less energy, and you're helping the planet. And in reality, probably not. I mean, don't get me wrong, please do that. Don't fly as much, don't do as much as you can, but you have to realize there are massive systematic things that push things certain ways. And individual choice, even though in principle, it's like in principle, everyone could have decided to vote green in the election, but very low probability of that happening because you have to convince everybody simultaneously to do it, and you have to convince them that it's not only the right thing to do, but that enough people won't defect to take advantage of the fact that they're not voting for somebody else in opposition to Trump, for example. So it gets complicated. And what I'm getting to, anyway, is I've had a Prius. It was my second Prius. I've had it since 2010. And this Prius, I really liked. Say what you will about the car. I found it to be, I liked the way it looked, honestly. I don't like the way the new ones look so much. I don't know why they've kind of like it just sort of tweaked the styling in a bad way, but I liked the way it looked, more or less liked the way it drove. It's not like a performance car by any means, but I would go to the gas station, I'd fill up, it'd be like 9 gallons. Even when gas was relatively expensive, it was like $25 to fill up from a basically empty tank, and maybe $30 at the most the whole time I had it. And I'd be next to a giant fucking truck, one of these novelty, loud, big pickup truck on steroids things. And they would have like $100 tank. I'd look at their fucking thing and be like, holy shit. Every time I saw that, I felt good about my car. It was maybe louder than a nicer car. And when I say nicer, I mean in the sense of more luxury. Partly because weight is your enemy for these kinds of things, generically speaking. There are complications to that, but insulation that reduces noise weighs a lot, and it doesn't really add much to performance or any of this stuff. So for efficient cars, they tend to be a little bit louder. It wasn't my favorite thing about that car. But overall, I liked it. There were stupid things about it, like if you put it in reverse, and I disabled this like the day that I got the car, but if you put it in reverse out of the factory, there's a beep, like a backup beep, like a construction beep, but it's inside of the fucking car. So if you're driving the car and you don't know you're in reverse, I'm sorry, I think there's something wrong with you. I don't think you should be fucking driving. So I don't think it's useful inside the car. There's no way anyone outside of the car hears this. So I don't know what the point of it was, but it was obnoxious and annoying. And yeah, but overall, the screen at the time was one of the better screens that you could get in a car. In the future, like now, you can get a nicer, bigger screen in a current Prius. The touch screen in it was resistive touch, which was kind of shitty, but for the time, again, good. Had decent navigation. Had a couple of things that I really liked. Like I could put in, annoyingly, a very finite number, but I could put in favorites, like locations that I would have. And I'd drive around and I'd see them. It had something that some people I've seen complain about online, but I loved it, called breadcrumbs, where, and unfortunately also very finite number of these, but you could see where you've driven. And it wasn't something that was like that useful. I don't think that it was necessarily really helping with anything, but certainly, like if you'd go someplace that you hadn't been, you could kind of see, oh, I was over here before. Or if you're visiting somebody and you don't know quite, like there are 4 streets that look all very similar, you can see, oh, not only is there a flag where they are, but this is the street that I took getting out of here, or getting into here. It was really nice. And, so overall, I could do a review of that car, I guess. But the car had, touching my eye, by the way, I use eye gel at night, and because my eyes are just permanent dry, and if I don't use it, then they will be like just crazy dry in the morning, and then it leaves this residue of carboxymethyl cellulose just down at the bottom. Just explaining that. Total diversion, and I still haven't even gotten to the subject, so I'm probably like half through without ever talking about the thing I want to talk about. So welcome to Tangents. If you're coming here for another reason, yeah, this is what you get. I'm sorry. But I had the car, it was like 240-ish K miles, and started getting a check engine light, started getting some weird stuff happening the last like 10,000 miles. The check engine light was very intermittent. Like it'd come on and then I'd take it in and it would go off before they could check it. There was no code that they could get for some reason, whatever. Finally, though, like a few weeks before it finally like crapped out, it's still like kind of drivable, but it got to the point where I was thinking, like, if I drove it, I certainly wouldn't want to take it on the freeway. And definitely, like, even around just locally, I feel like there's a very good chance, especially knowing what's wrong with it, very good chance that you'll get it someplace and then not be able to drive it out. And then you have to get it towed or whatever. So maybe, actually what I'm going to do is talk about this, probably carry this through, and then this next thing that I'm going to talk about that was going to be the subject for today, I'm going to put on the next one of these, because there's no way I'm going to get through even a fraction of these. And so I'm going to set this down. Could very easily cut that out, but it's not my thing. I'm sorry. It's not a sign of disrespect. It's just, like, I know how long it takes to go through and edit it and watch it and like tighten things up like that, and I just don't have the time. But anyway, going back, I have the car, and it starts not just doing this check engine light, but like shaking, violently shaking. And then I could tell there was something that I didn't know exactly what it was. Kind of thought it might be something with timing or like misfiring or something, because and also like I could get it past. There was like a regime where it was going at low speed, And in that regime, it would do this. And then you get it past that, and then it would be okay-ish, relatively. Finally got the check engine light to come on, go someplace with an OBD reader, and we got two things. One of the spark plugs is misfiring, and two, water pump is not working. So that's not great. Eventually, a couple days later, or a week later, I don't know, take it into the Toyota dealer and find out, okay, got some problems here. So yeah, the water pump, which is the cooling fluid for the gas motor. There's also a pump for the batteries and the electric motor. That was fine. But the cooling system for the primary, the internal combustion ICE motor, not working. I think it's working, but just not perfectly. That was not a great thing, but the bad thing, and the reason that the plug was fouled, was basically that the gasket was not quite blown, but leaking. So coolant is leaking into the combustion chambers. You get, combusting coolant. It's not good for anything. The coolant itself was like leaking out of the motor. So because of this, the coolant level was dangerously low. And it's the situation where basically, okay, we could change the spark plugs out. They're going to get fouled again very soon. The gasket has really got to be replaced. Replacing the gasket for the internal combustion engine is like $3,500 just for that, which I'm sitting there like going, And the pump was like $650. So between these couple of things, over $4,000 just to get the car like reasonably drivable. It's already got, it's been a good car. It was drivable, but before this, I had, take it in for regular routine maintenance, but it had several $1,000s worth of stuff that they're like, you can drive without this, but you really should get it fixed. And eventually you're not even going to be able to drive without it. So overall, if I was taking the car and, fixing it up, it would have cost something on the order of like probably 6 or 7K to get those things taken care of. Not to mention also had some exterior damage to a couple quarter panels. That one I've probably talked about, but I had the car, moved to Paris, let my mom drive the car while I was gone, and I'm not blaming her in any way for this, but she's driving it, and some asshole kid, and to be fair, again, like the Obama Chipotle sneeze guard thing, I'm sure he didn't mean it. He's a new driver. What are you gonna do? But he's coming out of McDonald's and doesn't see her, who knows what. Whatever the fuck, hits her in the back. She's fine, luckily, but some cosmetic damage to the car. This is kind of funny also because like a year or two before this, one of the quarter panels also had to get replaced, and this was not even me, but I was driving it, and I'm going through Papago Park, and there's a roundabout there. And in the roundabout, there are 2 lanes. So the outer lane, in this one area, you're supposed to come in, and then you leave. You have to leave. Like it literally, you look at the stripes and it's like, this is just what this is for. The inner lane can go around the circle, or you can leave. So it's like the outer lane has to leave. Inner lane has the option to leave or continue. Incidentally also, I drove in the UK, and driving the air quotes wrong way is a little weird, but you get used to it pretty quickly. The roundabouts, they're a little scary like the first time you use them maybe, or two, but once you get comfortable with them, they make me angry that in this country we have these fucking stoplights. It's just so dumb, so fucking dumb in contrast. And I'm not saying they don't have stoplights in the UK, but I am saying like 99% of the time we have stoplights where you could just put a roundabout in and the flow of traffic would be much better. The rules for a roundabout, like the chance of hitting somebody if you know what you're doing, very low. In this stuff, you're like, okay, I'm at the roundabout. You look left, or in this case, right. Well, depends on which way you're going, traffic is going, but look left or look in the direction of oncoming traffic. Let's say that. A rule that actually works both places. And if there's no car, then you can go. If there's a car, you wait. And it's such an easy rule. And you don't have to look the other way. I mean, just do it probably just to be a little bit safe. But you can reasonably be assured that there's no traffic coming from that way. Unlike an intersection where you have to look both ways. And then pedestrian stuff also, I mean, Arizona is not the best place for pedestrians, but even in places where there are tons of pedestrians, like European cities, very rarely do cars and people mix well. So yeah, it's a interesting and problematic thing. Cars are occupying there's, I can't remember where it was. I'll try to find it and maybe drop it in here, but there's a great picture that shows, the city, or like a city where you've got like a block and a couple intersections and streets, and people are on there, and instead of streets, they've drawn like just pits. It's like a big crevasse, and it's basically just showing you how much of our space we've ceded to cars, and it's fucking crazy. It's legit proper nuts how much space that we have, that we, stuff that we're living around, that we're walking around, is just for cars. I look in my neighborhood, and of course, not a trivial thing to fix this, but in my neighborhood, the amount of space, and we're Arizona again, we're spread out, we have nice wide streets, not complaining about that. I lived in Hawaii and the streets there are narrow and poorly maintained. The wide streets that are smooth, pretty fucking nice, very straight. My sister can't stand it because she'll fall asleep, but generally speaking, it's nice to drive here. It's nice to navigate here because you have a nice grid. But if you're a pedestrian, it's kind of shitty. You have to go to the crosswalk and all of this kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying put a bridge in at every intersection, although if you could, given my druthers, really, I would so rather live in a place where, if you want to have a car, you can have a car, but it's basically just a completely unnecessary and frivolous luxury. You could walk to the store, no problem. You can, if you need to move stuff in or out, or you have like freight, maybe you have a tunnel or something coming to your place, or maybe there's some kind of system where you can move stuff, like bulky stuff, that doesn't involve having a garage. Look in your house and see how much space is wasted, and really like truly wasted in the garage. And then I go around my neighborhood, and the garage for a lot of people is just like packed with shit. And a lot of people don't even put their cars in there. So it's like, maybe they would still want that giant space for hoarding stuff, I guess. But yeah, it's very weird to me. And then you have all the streets versus what it would take for pedestrians. And you can imagine a world pretty easily, I think, where even if you have individual single-family homes, you have a nice grid sort of train or people mover system or something. And, imagine wherever you are, it is within a 5-minute walk to something that will take you wherever the fuck you want to go, probably faster than you could get there in a car. And you don't have to worry about parking. You don't have to worry about any of this other shit. And also, like, in a more ideal world, you could imagine, okay, well, they'll take you to a train station or to an airport or something, and then you can essentially, like, literally go from where you are, hop on a thing, like toss your bag on your back, hop on this thing, and you're whisked away. Or maybe you don't even toss your bag on your back. I mean, you want to go a step further, you don't even have to carry your bag. Talk about that later, but you know, you're going with very little effort, taking all your shit, and you get wherever the fuck you want to go, and you never have to drive. And I understand people like the freedom of driving, but I think a lot of this is like the freedom of picking your insurance company. You don't realize the freedom of not driving. You know, I will say this, I lived in Paris for a while, and you know, I've spent a decent amount of time in London and Madrid and a couple of other, and a little bit in New York. And the feeling of not having to drive, I mean, don't get me wrong, when the weather sucks, I love being in the car and having it warm and it's raining outside. And also you know, it's my own little bubble. I don't have to deal with other people. It's pretty nice. I can't argue with that. It's very nice, but it's also kind of selfish. Incidentally, you know, this will dovetail probably into the next one of these, where I will talk about my list, but there's something called The Boring Company, made by Elon Musk. And The Boring Company is basically this, well, there's a whole lot of shit that I don't want to get into, but he's got this Hyperloop concept. Hyperloop is meant to be like essentially a evacuated, you know, low vacuum, but still evacuated, basically no air tube with high-speed vehicles going through it. Sounds great, but then you start, you know, adding some caveats to it. He made this Boring Company, boring, like boring through the earth. So he's got these excavators, digs a tunnel, and basically it starts looking a lot like a train, but shittier. Train is on rails, so, you know, rails, it's hard to go off the rails. Yeah. Now his Boring Company, like, they're building tunnels, they're putting Teslas in it, Teslas in tunnels. And the Teslas are not even going to be self-driving, at least initially. They're going to have drivers. He's opening a thing in Las Vegas, which is where I'm talking about this for. But very short distance, could be like a people mover, and there are many there. Could be a train, already exists kind of. And the idea is, yeah, okay, you're in the tunnel. In the Hyperloop concept, you're going, you know, maybe even faster than the speed of sound because you have no air or very little air. But in practice, not going to work for a lot of reasons. But then here, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's technically possible, but not going to, in terms of engineering, until you have massive automation and the ability to essentially have everything maintained and perfectly dialed in. And, you know, if you're at the point where labor is essentially free, then you can do stuff like this. Today, it's a little far, but, or at least on Earth. Maybe if you're on the moon, you dig a tunnel, you don't have to worry about evacuating it because it's by default evacuated. You don't have a big pressure differential, for example. But anyway, going back to this, you know, he's got this concept, sounds cute, and then you start digging into it, and it's like a shittier version of a metro, or an underground, or a tube, or whatever, a subway. It's a subway, but instead of having big trains which can carry like 1,000 people, he's putting people in cars which can carry a handful of people. The cars are set up so that they're in these, you know, to save money, very narrow tunnel, which means that the car, if it stops, you're kind of fucked. If there's any kind of issue at all and you're stuck in the tunnel, you can't really get out and escape because the tunnel is like this and the car door is like this. You can't open the door. And if you're, you know, I could probably open the window and crawl out, although where am I going to go? Even if there's an access hatch periodically, I'd have to crawl over other cars. But I'm pretty mobile. If somebody's in a wheelchair, they're fucked in there. In a tube, The trains don't have batteries, or maybe they have some backup, but it's not the primary power source. Uh, it's coming from the rails and overhead line. So that means if there's a fire, then you can just cut the power and the ignition source of the fire is gone. You still have fuel, but it's not like a big gas tank or giant chunk of batteries. In the Teslas and Tunnels model, there are cars with a giant battery pack that's like, at minimum like 75, 85 kilowatt hours, but probably like 100 kilowatt hours in some of them. You convert that to gas, and it's like, oh, it's a lot of fuel to explode very violently and to burn, like a fucking torch. So you just look at this and you're like, okay. And you start figuring out things like throughput. And it's just, if you watch Elon talk about stuff, about this stuff especially, he's like, oh, traffic sucks, and and then he's talking about things where, like, if he was talking about building a public transit system, I'm all for it. But what he's talking about instead is like, oh, but you want to be in a shitty Tesla, and don't get me wrong, Teslas are nice enough cars, but relatively shitty compared to being in a train. You're going to be in this thing where you've got a ton of them, so many more failure points versus one. For the same number of people, you're talking like literally hundreds more vehicles, which means hundreds more failure points. And if one fails, it shuts down the whole system. So, because there are no bypasses, and it's not like the tubes have like crisscrosses where you can get out of behind somebody. If there's a fire, it's in a fucking tunnel. There's no place for the energy to come out of. You have batteries on board instead of power coming from outside. So if there's a fire, it's going to kill a lot of people. And there's no real way to evacuate, especially if you have limited mobility, if you're elderly or in any other way not able to crawl through a fucking window and over cars. And even someone like me who can do that stuff easily, I can do it easily when things are good, but what the fuck happens when there are a bunch of people screaming and like shit's happening and there's smoke and all this other shit? I don't know that I could do it. So it's this fucked up dumb system. And I have such mixed feelings about this dude. And most of them are not good, honestly. But the problem with the motherfucker is, and also like he's got his net worth. Now granted, we can talk later about how, okay, if you look at the net worth for Bezos or Musk or any of these people, the bulk of that is in their stock. So Bezos, whatever is the most insulting and annoying to him, he doesn't actually have like 200 billion of cash or whatever the current value is. Whatever that is, it's not like he's got that much liquidity. He's got that much in Amazon stock. And yeah, if he tried to sell it, or even even like $1 billion worth of it, it probably would drive the price way down, which would have an impact on the amount that he could actually squeeze out of there. You probably can't just liquidate hundreds of billions of dollars of stock. Though that doesn't mean that you don't have effective like purchasing ability, trading stock, or like, oh well, shit, you've got this much money as collateral. You can borrow on it, and right now interest rates are basically zero, so you could borrow that much money pretty easily at very low interest. Yeah. But anyway, moving on. Dislike a lot of things about the guy. He's very bad, more than a little problematic with things like, and I'm not going to say, just to lump stuff together and say like pronouns, because he's talked specifically about that, but just generally speaking, being respectful and understanding of other people. Things that don't, I don't know, there are so many things, and again, this is like, don't park in the right lane when there's no turn lane and there's somebody behind you and there's a red light. It doesn't really cost you that much to do the alternate. It just takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of thought, a little bit of consideration, and it makes somebody else's life, in some cases, significantly better. So why would you not? Why would you be against that? It's just fucking annoying. And that's not the only thing. I mean, like for labor, he's done some pretty shitty things. One of the most shitty things about this guy is just that, he talks so much shit about California and taxes and all this stuff and regulations. All of his companies, and I fucking love SpaceX and I like Tesla a lot. But these companies, by and large, exist because of federal grants and because of federal funding for things like space research and energy. Solar City, or now part of Tesla. All this shit started out and got a lot of like billions of dollars of taxpayer money that was, So you get that, and then you're like stiffing the people. You're not paying it back, There's nothing wrong. It's great that these things existed. It's great that a company exists based on it. Not so great when you built your company on that shit and you're not paying it forward. You're not we publicly invested in you with the understanding that you're gonna, if you succeed, we're not just benefiting from having that technology, but we're also going to benefit by you being successful and paying a fair share of taxes back into the system. That's fucking basic decency 101. And it gets back to this obscene greed that people have. He's talked a lot of really dumb shit about the pandemic. It's not a big deal, it's gonna go away. It's ridiculous how far off he was. It's ridiculous how much people, it's an annoying thing that you can't criticize this man on Twitter, for example, without getting, there's a cartoon picture that's like, valid criticisms, Elon Musk, and then there's this weird nerd guy like jumping between the criticism and Musk. I don't know what the fuck the point of that is. Why do you think that sucking up to a billionaire is gonna get you money or prestige or anything? You're gonna become a billionaire because this is actually an interesting thing. This is a tangent, but it's the whole fucking point of this thing. One thing that I saw on Twitter a couple days ago, I wish I could attribute it to whoever said it. I'm sure it's not other people have said it too, but they phrased it pretty well. I'm gonna botch it, but basically what they were saying is that a lot of people consider the American dream to become a billionaire, to be, to become super wealthy. The actual dream should be, to live a good life and to not have people be poor and suffering and starving. The thing is, we have so many resources, so much money that everybody could be comfortable. Everybody could be living a decent life. Everybody could have access. And I hate the word, people have ruined this. But when I say access in this case, I mean if you want to go to university, it's free. And if you want to just subsist and live in a comfortable enough place, you can. If you want to quit your job and start a company, and you don't have to worry about healthcare, you don't have to worry about not being able to pay rent and all these things. I'm not saying you can quit and live in a fucking mansion, but you could live comfortably enough. And we have the resources for that. You do that and instantly, almost overnight, sure, you'll get a couple people who freeload and just sit there and play video games. But at the same time, who gives a fuck? And you'll get a lot of people doing things like leaving shitty jobs and getting a better job, or getting education or training, or doing research, or making art or poetry or whatever the fuck that they would otherwise not have the time and resources to do. And all of that stuff, in both the short term and the long term, massively benefits everybody. You're making an investment that pays all of us huge dividends. Also, it just makes you feel less shitty to be in a place where you're not driving down the street and constantly at every intersection seeing somebody with a sign that says, don't judge me, I'm on the street, I don't have any food or money. And the thing that sucks about it is like maybe they're just a scammer, but at the same time, if they had a comfortable safety net, you could see that and go like, okay, this person is actually okay and they're just scamming me. But as it is today, you see that and you have to think, well, maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe they desperately need resources that we're not giving them. And the thing that's just disgusting about all this stuff is that we have the resources. Millions of kids die. The number of people that die of starvation and preventable things like, or not even going to the length of dying, just having blindness, not enough vitamin A in your diet at the wrong time in your life, and you can go blind, right? Vitamin A, not a complicated thing. This is something we've had the technology to add to food for a long time. We've had plenty of food and plenty of the things that have it in them. And even, this is a whole other tangent that I could go on, but I'm not going to now. We had something called golden rice, which I don't know what's happened to it, but it seems to have just been like completely pushed out. Golden rice was genetically modified rice that expressed the genes that would make either vitamin A or a precursor to it. And so it would be a little bit yellow. And because people got, GMOs are always automatically bad, it basically doesn't exist. This one thing could not only feed people, but prevent blindness. That's totally unnecessary. And yet you have people who are like, oh no, we can't have GMOs. And yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not a big fan of, say, Roundup Ready crops or crops with Terminator disease, Terminator genes in them, where like, you'll have some genetically modified crop and farmer used to be able to just grow the crop and get seeds for the next year out of that crop. And now we've engineered it so, oh, well, you want seeds, here are your seeds, grow your crop, and it doesn't produce any more seeds. So if you want more seeds next year, you have to come to us. There are lots of fucked up things with genetic engineering. Roundup Ready stuff, you can pour endless amounts of glyphosate on it and not kill it, which means that all of our food now is covered, saturated in this shit, which turns out, probably not shockingly, to be not great for us. And also, it's building up resistance in weeds and other things like this, which means eventually it's not even going to work anymore. So you have these things, and it's just like, why are you doing things like this? There are just so many things that could be so much better. And the thing about it that really kills me is, and again, I try always not to focus on the selfish angle for things, but there are so many good selfish reasons to do the right things. And there are also plenty of good selfless reasons to do the right things. And yet, for most people, it seems like too much to ask. So anyway, with all of that, I will focus next time on the topic that I was going to do today, which I don't think I even touched on. Sorry, it's the nature of tangents. I'm not even going to include it in the title, but yeah. Suffice it to say, as a minor cliffhanger, my Prius basically became unusable like a month ago, maybe a little bit more, I don't know. And yeah, I will talk more about that and sort of where I went from there and my kind of mixed feelings about it next time. So with that, Happy New Year. 2020, people talk about like it being the worst year ever. I don't know. I mean, okay, in my life, I'm not saying there weren't worse years, but you don't have to go that far back in history to come up with times that were, I would say, objectively worse. Like World War II, go to any random year there, you probably, the Depression, and you go back further, the year without summer, probably worse than 2020. So I don't think I don't accept that it was the worst year ever. Sucked for a lot of people, and a lot of people are needlessly, starving or getting evicted or whatever, not good things. But it annoys me that people. This is actually, it gets into, like I talked about education last time. Knowing a little bit of history and being able to put things in perspective And understanding also, I mean, if you are Jeff Bezos, then, or someone like that, um, just understanding that maybe being such a greedy fucker is not the best long-term survival strategy for you. Because at a certain point, and I'm not saying like people are necessarily going to rise up and break out the guillotines ever, but at a certain point you kind of understand why people might. And you certainly understand like, okay, you're having a party and you're taking all the money. If you just gave a little bit back, a little bit more back, paid some stuff forward, you were not a complete fucking dick to your employees, things like this, people might be less inclined at some point in the future to do things that will be economically devastating to your companies. And, I mean, like, even if you go back to like Standard Oil and Rockefeller, who I think was probably a giant dickhole, he at least felt this need to do things to kind of offset his dickholishness. A lot of people today don't seem to have that, and yet they're still trying to build up this monopoly of something. Seems like probably not the best strategy. Like, okay, you control politics at the moment. I can imagine a time like a decade from now where you don't, and it turns out people end up not just taxing you like 60 or 70%, and they don't just end the 20% bullshit long-term capital gains tax thing, which I have to tell you, like, I do understand some of the reasons for it, and things are complicated, it's not like it's a complete no-brainer to eliminate that. But to me, if somebody's making billions of dollars a year or in some cases in days, in stock price increase, and of course, we understand this is not liquid, but having that be not realized as income, and even if it is realized as income when you cash some stuff out, at like top of 20%, versus the current top tax rate, which is only like 37.5%, still pretty low. But it's, almost twice 20%. That kind of thing, I feel like that's a party that probably ends, and you probably would like to not be a complete fucking dickhole about it. I mean, this is one of these things like Mayor Bloomberg. He's a billionaire. He put $1 billion toward, kind of fucking over Bernie, and partially also to beat Trump. But I think largely he was motivated by, I want to protect my shit. Gotta tell you, maybe don't be so fucking greedy, because at some point people might, like, if you were not so greedy, okay, we're gonna tax you, but a reasonable amount. At some point, if you continue this path, which you've done, like, people are okay, but that's not going to continue forever. You have to imagine you might get up to like 95% tax rate, and you might also have like a one-time wealth tax that forces you to either liquidate a giant chunk of your holdings, which frankly I think, when you're I don't know how you divide this between a startup company and like a big company, but if you're a company and you're just starting out, having one person have the bulk of the shares, the bulk of the equity, is fine. I think it's kind of like how things probably should operate. Equitably distribute it among people in the company, but when it's just you, okay, you've got most of it. When you start getting to the point where you're, not even Amazon, but tens or hundreds of millions of dollar kind of revenue company, you have to start thinking like, probably not in the best long-term interest of society to have one person have that much control of the company itself or that many resources. Maybe, okay, you have to cash it out, or maybe you just put a giant chunk of your shares into some kind of a trust where you do get to have some benefit from them, although Not probably directly. Yeah, it's a tricky thing because you don't want to be having people motivated to like blow up the trust by doing things that are not fair, that will, or bad, that increase their share price. So I don't know. You kind of think about it and you're like, shit, maybe you should just force people who have crap tons of money in stock to liquidate a lot of it. Now, I'm not saying if you have $1 million in stock or you have some nice retirement, you have to liquidate that shit. By all means, keep going. But when you start having like Bezos kind of money or Musk kind of money, I don't know. I think the world would be a better place if Musk had to, and you could even say like, okay, you can accumulate $5 billion worth of whatever. But once you get past that, you have to liquidate it. The rest beyond that, you can't hold on to it. Or maybe you can hold on to it for like 60 or 90 days, but very briefly. And you can imagine like this. I mean, even then, like $1 billion is a crap ton of money, but it's a hell of a lot less than a couple $100 billion, and certainly a hell of a lot less than $1 trillion. Yeah, and you start looking at the amounts of like when you look at Bloomberg. Bloomberg is not Bezos, but Bloomberg still has enough money where he can just say, okay, I'm going to throw $1 billion at an election, and well, ignoring the fact that he's a kind of shrewd businessman and he probably not going to do that unless he thinks he's going to get ROI on his $1 billion, but he's in a position where he could do that, and if he wasn't going to get ROI, he could just do it for fun, and it's not going to hurt him. It's not going to change really anything for him about his life or what he can do or anything like this. When you have that kind of money, it's crazy. And I don't think there's, I mean, don't get me wrong, it'd be nice to have a lot of resources and be able to do a lot of things. I don't know that it's good for any one person to have that much, and especially when you start looking at how much like the Kochs have influenced our society. Having that kind of ability to push knobs and levers, it's scary and it's not good. And you don't even have to, like, in truth, if you look at how, for want of a better word, cheap legislators are, you can, you go through like the people getting money from the NRA or petrochemical companies or insurance companies or whatever. A lot of senators and representatives get a couple $1,000, $10,000 from these people. Maybe an annual thing, but on a big scale, it's not a lot of money, and yet that's enough to buy their vote, and also their loyalty. If like something's in the committee and they can push things one way or another, we can just do this and that. We need to add this amendment because Exxon wants it. I mean, probably not saying that, but it's a fucked up situation. Anyway, with that, I think this is probably quite long enough. I hope you have a healthy new year and happy, and I hope things get better. We'll see. I really hope that all this Trump shit fizzles out, and I'm not talking about politics in that sense, at least for a while. I'm not super optimistic about that, but I'm just tired of it. With that, thanks again, and 再见.